Thank you for joining us and welcome to the hashtag Her Vote Forum, Women in Politics. The hashtag Her Vote Club was founded in commemoration of the centennial of the 19th Amendment with the core mission to preserve the voices of women and to encourage political participation. We do this by asking women questions surrounding their community, their lives, and their participation with and in governments. As a civic engagement initiative associated with Radcliffe Institute's Schlesinger Library on the History of Women, in America's Long 19th project, the voices of the women who engage with us will be preserved for future historians to better understand our world today. Today's forum is the first in a series of virtual forums we will be holding on the issues important to women. Hashtag Her Vote would first like to thank our panelists today, Councillor Simmons, Vice Mayor Mallon, and Mayor Siddiqui. We would also like to thank the Radcliffe Institute for facilitating this forum and Schlesinger Library and the Mellon Foundation for their continued support. First, we will have brief remarks by Professor Jane Kaminsky. After her remarks, we will moderate a conversation with Mayor Siddiqui, Vice Mayor Mallon, and Councillor Simmons. After that, we will take questions from the audience for the remainder of the program. We encourage you to use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions at any time throughout the program, and we will respond to as many as we can. If you want to ask a specific panelist a question, please include their name in the question. We also ask you to tweet your thoughts on the conversation and overall theme using the hashtag HerVote throughout the forum today, as well as in the future. And now I'll turn it over to Professor Kaminsky, the Carl and Lily Pforzheimer Foundation Director of the Arthur Elizabeth Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America, the Jonathan Trumbull Professor of American History in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and the Principal Investigator of Schlesinger Library's Mellon-funded Long 19th Amendment project.
Thanks, Slinger. It's great to see you all here today. And I wanted to say just a bit about two things: Schlesinger Library and Radcliffe Institute's involvement with Cambridge Rindge and Latin High School, and then the specific genesis of our work with hashtag HerVote under the auspices of the Long 19th Amendment Project. So the summer of 2020 represents Schlesinger's fourth summer working closely with the faculty of Cambridge Rindge and Latin High School to bring the library into their classrooms and bring Cambridge Rindge and Latin students into Schlesinger and into Radcliffe. It's always been a citizenship project because you are all citizens of Cambridge and Harvard University, and we're seeking to reinforce each other. Our collaboration started 4 years ago when Marlon Kahn worked in Schlesinger's reading room to create the Schlesinger mini archive, which the library supported over 2 years and which now has library resources in CRLS history classrooms on a consistent basis. Then last summer, we worked with Marlon and his colleagues Carolyn Burtz and Kanku Kabango as they developed a women's history curriculum for Rindge, timed to air the year of the suffrage centennial, but to extend long beyond it as a permanent formation. We felt so passionate about working with Rindge under the auspices of the Long 19th Amendment Project because the project wants to see the long and broad work of gender and voting rights in the United States as something that extends much earlier than we generally think it does, that encompasses more kinds of people in more kinds of efforts, and that it extends much further into the future, not a project that ends in 1920, but in some ways that begins in 1920. So one of the super exciting things for us about the hashtag her vote work that the club has been doing under Marlon Kahn and Chris Montero's guidance is its intergenerational aspect, students reaching out to their elders and then thinking about their own civic actions in the future. As Ninger said, we will be collecting the social media artifacts that #HerVote creates, which means that they are literally making history in this campaign, and I expect researchers to want to see it in future. So I'm very happy that the Mellon Foundation's funding can support Marlon and Chris in their superintending of the #HerVote posse over the summer, that we're partnered in this work with the Mayor's Summer Youth Employment Program, which is supporting the work of the students and recognizing it as work. And that their support from Radcliffe also extends around now virtual Radcliffe Yard. And I want to give a special shout out to my colleague, Abby Cohen, who has worked very closely with Marlon and Chris and their students. And with that, I will turn it over to our student moderators for today's panel, Rain and Sophia.
Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui has served on the Cambridge City Council since 2018 and is the first Muslim American mayor in the history of the state of Massachusetts. She is also a proud CRLS alum. Vice Mayor Alana Mallon is serving her second term on the Cambridge City Council. Prior to her public service on the council, she worked to found the Cambridge Weekend Backpack Program in Cambridge Public Schools to address food insecurity in the city of Cambridge and connect families to needed resources. Councillor Denise Simmons has served on the Cambridge City Council since 2002, including 2 terms as mayor from 2008 to 2010 and from 2016 to 2018. She was the first Black woman to serve as mayor in Massachusetts and the first Black openly lesbian mayor in the United States.
Welcome, Councillor Simmons, Vice Mayor Mallon, and Mayor Siddiqui. Black lives matter. They matter now, they mattered in the past, and they will continue to matter in the future. Starting with Councillor Simmons, what are the best ways that individuals, including the youth, can support Black Lives Matter movement to bring systematic change in their own communities?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I want to thank everybody that was involved in making this happen. This is an exciting moment, and it gives my heart a great deal of joy and pride. First of all, to have CRLS students involved, but also that we're getting the word out as far and wide, even in this time when we can't get around and be in each other's company. But specifically to the question, what can individuals, including youth, do to support Black Lives Matter? The broader answer is act local. We can start on your own block, start in your own neighborhood, give support to people of color in particular, because even though we have this swell of activism, still we're losing what I call authentic Black voices. And so for someone who has supported Black Lives Matter and a number of other organizations, I always know it's to make sure you ask yourself, when in your support, who's not here? And how can I help to get that person here? And how can I support them by being here? And then your support should also be, like, as I said earlier, local. I think of myself. I started being an activist in high school, and I just grew it out over time. And that's what I would hope that our young people do. I also want you to be persistent and persevere. Right now, we are at a critical time, and everybody's eyes and ears are focused on what has happened and what is happening to African Americans. But this has happened to us before as African American community. And to give you a brief example, there's a guy named Yuri Stamps. He grew up in Cambridge. He's my age. He's about 60 or 70 years old. He went to move in Framingham and was shot by the Framingham police, and nobody noticed. We have to notice the things that happen to Black lives right in our own neighborhoods, right in our own blocks, right on our own streets. And we have to take and give a voice to that. So if you want to support Black Lives Matter, if you want to support people, brown and Black people, we have to continue to sustain an effort to make change, even when it's hard to do it. Right now, we have a watershed of support and energy, but it doesn't continue, unfortunately. And then we go back to our jobs, our schools, our lives until the next major catastrophe. We've got to make a commitment that we're not going to let another major catastrophe for a Black and brown person happen again. So the way we support is to keep vocal, act local, stay persistent, stay focused, and keep moving it forward.
Thank you, Counselor Simmons. Mayor Siddiqui, what are the best ways that individuals, including the youth, can support the Black Lives Matter movement to bring systematic change in their own communities?
Thank you, and thank you for having this forum today. And to continue on what Councillor Simmons just said, I think it is really important to stay attuned to what is happening locally. I think some of the things that you can do is support Black businesses, restaurants, have your family support Black businesses and restaurants. These are kind of tangible things that go a long way in the short term. There's also this element of educating yourself and your families on systematic racism and how systems that uphold white supremacy perpetuate violence against the Black community here in the United States. And so there's so much reading and education that also needs to be done as we continue to get involved and support the Black Lives Matter movement. Something that I have been doing is I've been reading a lot of books. Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson has really opened my eyes. I had done some work in law school around sentencing and thinking about these issues related to mass incarceration and so forth, but the Equal Justice Initiative is doing amazing work. So getting involved and learning about these key issues that tie directly to the movement is really important. And I think lastly, I'd say it's really important to amplify Black voices. I saw this article the other night about what was trending on Netflix, and it was this movie called The Help. And one of the actors said, this was a movie that came from a white perspective, directed by a white author. Let's actually watch the movies that are being directed by and written by Black artists. So really uplifting on social media our Black leaders, our artists, our musicians, our actors, entrepreneurs, you name it. I think we don't do that enough, and I think there's a real lack of awareness about that. And so that's something that I really think that youth have, really, are on social media much more than some of us. And so I think that's one way you can really amplify Black voices. So those are some 3 or 4 things that you can do and practice daily.
Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui. Vice Mayor Mallon, same question to you. What are the best ways to support individuals supporting the Black Lives Matter movement?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I first just wanted to say thank you to you and Raina and Ninger and the Radcliffe Institute for pulling us all together today to have this really incredibly important conversation, even though we're all in our houses or not doing this together. I'm glad that we're still having this really important conversation. So just to build off what my colleagues both said, I think acting local, as Councillor Simmons mentioned, is critically important. But when you think about using your activism and using your voices right now, something that's really been in the spotlight is policing and how do we reform policing. And it has captured the national conversation. But I think, it's more than that. When we think about systemic racism and institutional racism, we need to think about education, we need to think about housing, we need to think about workforce development, and all of that happens locally. I think we need to really think about how COVID has really shown us that the Black community has been disproportionately affected. And the reasons why are housing, education, racism in the medical profession, right? Like these are all things that we need to be thinking about locally and acting on, and not just chasing kind of a trend of what's happening, but really thinking about what in my community can I do as one person to really affect systemic change in the community. I think, you know, the other thing is I would say as young people, centering those Black voices and making sure that there's space and room for them to be heard is critical. You know, I went to a protest, I think, you know, my colleagues were there, many of you may have been there in the Cambridge Common on Sunday, and one of the speakers said, you know, white people, you know, we don't need allies, we need co-conspirators in this work. And I think when we think about how to support the movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, it is doing that co-conspirator work, but also creating that space and making sure we're taking a little bit of a step back and centering those who have been most affected. So I think it's a great question. Thanks for asking it. And I think, you know, our young people are going to be the ones that are leading the charge. So we really need you to center those voices and focus on all of this, all the institutions and all the ways that which could be helpful.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Mallon.
Right now, many young people are worried about the future and wondering what they can do at a time of global pandemic, but also in a movement towards racial justice. Mayor Siddiqui, what would you say to a teenage version of yourself now? Or what would you say to young people, especially women across America, about participating in elections?
Sure. So yeah, I think some of what my colleagues just have stated resonates in this answer too, about what we can be doing and thinking about. I think to the teenage version of myself, I think I would just say, you know, believe in yourself, even if you feel like you don't. And I would tell that teenage version of myself that that you're smart and you're capable, and you have the capacity in the future to change people's lives for the better if you dare to. And you know, I think back when I was a teenager, I didn't know what was possible. I didn't know how change was possible. And there's so many different ways that you can work in your community to bring about change. And it can be, you know, lifelong, right? It doesn't have to happen overnight. It doesn't have to be this one tangible thing. It can be a series of things. And it's really important to reflect, you know, on what that is. So I think that's what I would say to the teenage version of myself. But, you know, I think now more than ever, it is really important for young people, young women across America to be involved because there's so much at stake for women's rights in our elections. You know, our love and bodies are constantly a political battlefield. So it's really important to fight for that existence and freedom through voting. So I think that's what I'd say.
Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui. Vice Mayor Mallon, same question. What would you say to yourself as a teenager or to young women right now about participating in elections?
It's a great question. I, like Mayor Siddiqui, I was not involved when I was younger, and I was a teenager in high school. I didn't even really know that this city government existed. But if you think about what most affects you as a resident, it's the people who make decisions right in your own municipality that most directly affect you. And so you need to get involved. You need to understand, especially if you're a high school student, who's on your school committee, who's making those policies that are going to affect your daily life every single day. So getting involved, understanding who's running, understanding the issues that matter to your community, supporting candidates, you know, knocking on doors is one of the best ways to make sure that people get elected, and we need a lot of people to help us do that. So making sure that you're getting involved, knocking on those doors, and getting people that you really feel reflect your values on your local you know, school board or city council to help make those decisions. I would say that, you know, we have been lucky enough, the council, Councilor Simmons, the mayor, myself, to work with the Cambridge Youth Council at CRLS to affect some real change in Cambridge. you know, working with our local youth who have these amazing ideas but need local legislators to come, you know, bring them to fruition. So like free bus passes for students that are on free or reduced lunch. That's a huge change, and that happened just because of youth advocacy. I myself and Mayor Siddiqui helped some of our youth council members go testify at the State House this year around voting, lowering the voting age in municipal elections to 16. These are really important ways that, you know, our young women, our young people can get involved locally in elections. And the last thing I will say, especially around this, the women piece, you know, if you look around during this COVID crisis and the female elected leaders that are really doing the work, you know, at a national level, you look at countries like New Zealand, some of the Scandinavian countries that have women in leadership, Germany, you know, they really have like rose to the occasion, and COVID was not as much of an issue there as it was in other places. So if you're really looking to female leadership, I think you need to look no further than this COVID crisis to see that women can and should lead in some of these conversations. You look at Ayanna Pressley, you look at Catherine Clark, I mean, Senator Warren, we are very well represented here in Cambridge by strong female legislators, and it's critical that we continue to elect them.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons, what are your thoughts?
A lot of it's been said, but just to add a little bit to it, I have a little bit of a unique life in that I became activist very young, and I'll tell you by way of a story. I'm northern born, but southern raised in a lot of ways. So I spent a lot of my time in the deep south. And I remember going with my grandmother, we were traveling to a funeral in Georgia from Alabama. Now, my mother, she probably didn't realize she was an activist, but she was an activist in her own right. She was an activist because she left the South very early on because she couldn't vote, she didn't have control over her life, and she couldn't be a leader, the leader that she really was. So she comes to the North, but I'm going to the South all the time, and so we're traveling to this funeral, and we stop at a gas station. I go to use the bathroom, and of course, I do just like I would do it here. I go to the ladies' room, the door's locked. I go back and I ask the attendant, can I get the key? And he says, with a really strong Southern drawl, which I'm not going to try to imitate, he says, go round back. And I did. And around back was the colored bathroom without a door, hadn't been cleaned. And I assure you, if you had a dog, a Chihuahua, you would not have brought that Chihuahua into this bathroom. And I ran back to tell him full with righteous indignation that I was not going to use that bathroom. And I remember my grandmother collaring me and saying, you will get us killed. I was only 12. But from that day forward, I refused to be silenced. And so whether you can vote or not, your voice is your vote. Your voice is your power. So when you see something wrong in your classroom, in the schoolyard, just because you can't vote doesn't mean you can't voice that is wrong and stand up and stand out and be heard against that. And when you do that, you will find there are more people that support you, but we're afraid to use your voice. So the power of your voice, which will later become your vote, is so very important. If it doesn't exist, make it happen. We talked about the lowering the voting age initiative that we've been working on for over a decade, but we're still working at it because that persistence is important. So if you see something that needs to be changed, speak up about it. Know your history. Do you know women in Massachusetts have been voting since 1880? And I hope we get to talk a little bit more about that. So women in Massachusetts, particularly in Cambridge and Boston, have been able to vote since 1880, well before women got suffrage nationally. Know that, and let's build on that. And also realize that you can be involved in, I think the Vice Mayor mentioned it, in campaigns. So my children kind of grew up in campaigns. My 7-year-old granddaughter, she door knocks with me. She holds a sign, not very well, I might say, but she makes an attempt. And by that participation, she is learning, she understands. You know, in Cambridge, we vote in a very interesting way, which is proportional representation, which is another class and another discussion. But because she's involved now, it only increases her involvement later on. And then also understand, going back to the point of it's all local. You can start with right where you are to make a change, because there's some little young woman or a young man that is watching you. So be not only a role model, be a real model, people that someone can look and say, wow, she did that. She did this program with the Schlesinger Library in Radcliffe. I can do that. She stood up at public comment at a school committee meeting. I can do that. She ran for school president, class president, hall room monitor, whatever it is. You can start really now. So if I were to talk to my young teenage self, I would have said, try not to get your grandmother killed. But beyond that, I would have said, you're doing the right thing. Never allow yourself to be silenced. Your voice is your power.
Wow, thank you for your response. And audience members, please remember, if you have a question for our panelists, you can submit it to us through the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen. And if you want to ask a specific panelist a question, please include their name in that question. Thank you.
100 years ago, the passage of the 19th Amendment provided access to the polls for mainly white women. It is not until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that means of harassment and intimidation which were used against minority women were made illegal. Even with these steps, it is still difficult today for some women to get access to the polls. Vice Mayor Mallon, what does the centennial of the 19th Amendment mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, it's an amendment that's fraught with a lot of frustration and anger and joy, right? You know, we've got this amendment that, you know, gave women the right to vote, but it was only for some women. And so, you know, you're right in saying that it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act in 1965 that, you know, that there was decades later, where all women were allowed to vote. And I think if you just look at what's happening right now, it happened yesterday in Georgia, people are still fighting for the right to vote, and states are making it harder each and every day for people to vote, especially people of color. So there's a lot of work to be done. You know, I love that the Schlesinger Library is calling this the long 19th Amendment, because I think it's really important for us to be looking critically at the history and first wave feminism and the suffragists, the white suffragists, who did not include Black women and Black people in their work. It's a really complicated conversation, but it's the right one to have this year, especially this year in the 100th anniversary. So there's a long road to go. It's been a long road, but I'm appreciative that, you know, the Schlesinger Library here at Radcliffe is working with our students on this project, and I'm you know, the library, we went over to go visit it and see the artifacts and what's there. It is truly inspirational, but what it does tell us is that we, as Councillor Simmons said, we need to look at our history. We need to look at it critically and figure out how to move forward and how to make sure that everybody has access to the right to vote everywhere, every time.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons, what does the centennial of the 19th Amendment mean to you?
That's a great question, but it's a little bit loaded. One of the things that I've had the pleasure to do is work with the YWCA, and each year the YWCA and Community Conversations, we get together and we have an annual event called Trailblazing Women. And this year we were going to celebrate, we didn't want to say celebrate, we wanted to acknowledge the women's suffrage movement. So let me go back and let's go forward. Let's go back for a moment. Remember, women had the right to vote in Massachusetts, in Cambridge, on school committee and tax bonds going back to 1880. That's the good news. The bad news is it would take 90 years before we would elect a Black woman to city council, which is Sandra Graham. It would take 100 years to elect a Black woman to the school committee, Henrietta Adams, in 1980, and it would take 128 years for the city to elect a Black woman as mayor, and I'm proud to have filled in that position. So when we talk about women's suffrage, I say, let's acknowledge it, let's learn from it, but let's remember we're not there yet. So when I was talking about Trailblazing Women was this opportunity that the YWCA, through There are programs that support another program that we started, which is called GOLD, Girls Only Leadership Development, which teaches girls how to advocate for themselves. But with the GOLD Girls, with the YWCA, with Community Conversation, which is a forum for Black women, we come together and we have this annual event, Trailblazing Women. And this year we were talking about women's suffrage, but the tagline was 100 years and still waiting. And I kind of showed that, demonstrated that to you by looking at the statistics. So Black women, particularly in the southern states, as the Vice Mayor mentioned, are still waiting. We have Black men that are still waiting to be able to exercise that contract that the Constitution gives us, the right to freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that is so much denied. And embedded in that Constitution is the ability to have your voice heard by the right to vote. So where I have to acknowledge the strides that we have made, I cannot help but acknowledge and lay bare the fact that we're not there yet, particularly if you're a woman of color. And so, and particularly if you're a Black woman, what can we do? We cannot, as women, but certainly as Black women, waste our vote. There are some people that say, well, I'm not going to vote because nothing changes. I don't care if you cast a blank ballot. We have to exercise that right to vote, because in my community, in my family, many people lost their lives trying to exercise that right. And so for me, again, yes, we are going to acknowledge the work that we've done, but we can't forget how women of color specifically were marginalized in the suffragist movement. We have to realize that as we speak, as we sit here, there are Black women in particular, but the Black community in general, that are being denied the right to vote. And in Cambridge, where I know we think we are saved, we still have so much work to do to make it easy to encourage and to activate folks to make sure they get to the polls and their voices are heard. So let us acknowledge what we've done, but let's also acknowledge what we need to do, and know that it is everyone's responsibility to make sure everyone's voice is heard, particularly in the Black community.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Mayor Siddiqui, same question to you. What does the centennial of the 19th Amendment mean to you?
So I think Councillor Simmons put it very eloquently, and I don't have much to add. I think this, the 19th Amendment is, a reminder of a right that we shouldn't take for granted. And it's also reminds me that we must not abandon women of color, particularly Black women, in a movement, for equality ever again. I think there's so much history that's behind the 19th Amendment that people don't know about. And we have to do that educating. And as Councillor Simmons has said, there's a lot of work to be done. Vice Mayor mentioned what's happening on the national scale in Georgia, where people have been trying to cast the ballots, and they've been waiting for hours over issues on voting machines and logistics. And then you think about there's great work that the ACLU has started on thinking about how our country blocks the right to vote for so many. We have so many states that require voter IDs. Massachusetts is not one of them, but there's so many of these voter ID restrictions that prevent people to vote. There's voter registration restrictions as well. So there's all these, there's tangible policy in place that is getting in the way of one's right to vote, and particularly people of color. So, and it's by design. So we have to realize that. A lot of this has been by design. So how do we peel it back and actually further make these changes? So there is a lot of work to be done, as Councillor Simmons has said.
Thank you so much for your thoughts.
In the past 4 years, there has been a new generation of women entering public service. However, we also know that there are still too few women in public service today. Counselor Simmons, what has your experience in public service been like, and what would you say to young women thinking of entering the political arena?
Fabulous question. Absolutely fabulous. You know, my experience in public office has been hills and valleys. A lot of hills, but certainly my share of valleys. And what I mean by that, sometimes it's just not, it's not easy. When I first started, I wasn't easy to, there weren't a lot of women role models in public office. And so it was hard to find examples. And that's changed so much now with programs like Emerge and the Pipeline for Change and all these programs that train women how to run. That didn't exist when I started out. So just a little bit to back up, when we think about running for office, oftentimes women are daunted by it. They often say, and I've given talks and heard these questions asked, well, I don't know how, I can't. And I said, if you can run a household, you can run a city, I assure you. We have to stop holding ourselves back. So for me, I started in high school. When I was at Cambridge High and Latin, now Cambridge Rindge and Latin, young women couldn't wear pants. I know that's hard to imagine. I got together with a group of like-minded women, and we changed that. And now Women Forever Forward would be able to wear slacks and other wear that was not appropriate for a lady in my time. But I started in high school, and then I started working on my block when we had a chemical plant that was poisoning our neighborhood. And I made going from my block to my ward committee, from my ward committee to the school committee, and my school committee to the city council. And why I ran for school committee was because I went and petitioned with a bunch of other folks about why we should pay the affirmative action officer more so that they could do a really good job. And when we walked out the room, so did our issue. And that's what made me want to make that kind of change. So what I would say to young women is just do it. Nothing beats a failure but a try. And so you can start right there in your classroom by being the head of your class. You can then move on when you get to the high school to run for student school committee. You can run for ward committee in your local neighborhood. You can sit on citizen boards and committees. And when we talk about elected office, that's very important, but I don't want to diminish the role of serving on boards and commissions that are advisory to the city manager in our government, but are advisory to the body politic and can make change. And so I don't want young women to feel daunted. You know, it's so interesting. Men will try anything. They are fearless, but women are not trained to be that way. And we really have to push past the resistance that we can't do. I can't fundraise. Yes, you can. You fundraise for our schools. You fundraise for our churches. I can't hold elected office. How am I supposed to do it? You go out there and you try. And now there are so many more organizations that are there to support women running for office. But if that's absolutely not what you want to do, then support candidates, particularly women that are running. Make those phone calls for them. Hold those house parties. Hold those signs. Give those dollars. And my favorite story when I think about donations, I had this elder citizen who supported me, and she would every year, even when it was not election year, she would send me a donation. It was $2.50. It's a money order. It probably cost her $1 to get the money order, but she was committed to participate. And so what I'm trying to say here is that there's no deed or work when it comes to political involvement too small. But when it comes to thinking about running for office, try it, because if you see it, you can achieve it. If you see women running for office, then you know you can do it. If you see women in elected office, as with my colleagues, you can do it. So don't let fear of failure hold you back. Go forward, give it a try.
Thank you, Counselor Simmons. Mayor Siddiqui, did that story remind you of anything you'd like to share?
Sure. Yeah, that really resonated with me. I think when thinking about this question, a part of me, did say to just tell you to do it, right? And I think Counselor Simmons just brings up some really good points of it can look like a lot of different things. It can look like sporting candidates. It can look like joining boards. It doesn't have to be for a city council or school committee. It can start in very different ways. And so for me, it started in high school as well. Started when I worked with young people to co-found a youth council that was all around advocating on youth rights and lowering the voting age. And that led me to run for student body president. And some of the things that I realized was that I really loved trying to solve problems. I think one of the problems back then was we hadn't had dances in years. And so I said, we're going to have school dances. We're going to have like 7 dances. And everyone was like, wow, we're going to have dances. And so it was a small thing, but it was something that came from the community of students. And so I think, when you're thinking about public service, it isn't about you, right? It's about people. And I think when you enter public service, it is about using your voice, but then using the voices that come from the community to move critical policies forward. So I think it is really important that we have our governing bodies reflect the percentages of women we see across the United States, so that the policies passed reflect half of the population as well. So it's very critical. There are challenges, as Councillor Simmons mentioned, and I think I went through that in the last few years of, oh God, I don't know how to run for office. And I had that benefit of that Emerge program that I did that said, here are the nuts and bolts. This is how you fundraise. This is how you do this. I was still, it kept me up at night. I was like, I don't know how to run a campaign at all. But again, it's that attitude too. And I think the second time I ran, I said, I can run a campaign, right? And I think as women, as young women often do, it's a lot of, this is why we shouldn't do something. And here's the list. Here's a list of all the reasons why. And I think that tendency, we have to get better at really saying, here's why I'm going to do it. So there's a lot of those types of mental challenges you play that need to be talked out with, your community and your circle of friends that can keep you motivated and so forth. So I say definitely, if you're thinking about entering the political arena, do so. We're here to chat for you and answer any questions you have as you continue that journey.
Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui. Vice Mayor Mallon, how do these responses resonate with you?
It's funny, I was thinking about when Councillor Simmons was talking about how she'd had those ebbs and flows and hills and valleys. The term before Sumbul and I decided to run, Councillor Simmons was the only woman out of 9 city councillors. We had 8 men and 1 woman. And, I remember thinking, looking at that picture and feeling like we live here in Cambridge, one of the most progressive cities in the country, and we have 1 woman. And that just felt wrong to me. I think what's resonating for me, both with Councillor Simmons and with the mayor, is that the 3 of us were very active in our community before we ran for office. Whether we were on boards and commissions, whether we were politically active in high school. I started a program here in Cambridge that allowed me to work with all of the elected officials, and then I actually worked at City Hall. And I was really familiar with the community. I was really familiar with the challenges and the things that I wanted to fix, the things that I wanted to work on. And that brought me to a very authentic place when you're out on the campaign trail and you've decided to run, to have that story. What brought me to this work? Why do I want to run? Why do I feel compelled to do this in this moment? And what do I want to get done? And how can I work with others to get some of these issues that I feel really strongly about, because I've seen them in our community and I think I can help. One of the things that people always say is that women, it takes them 7 different times for people to say to them, you should run for office, before they stop saying, oh no, I couldn't. I don't know when I would find the time. I'm not smart enough. It's not for me. We somehow need to get to the point where women don't need to be asked so many times, right? I mean, men, nobody needs to ask them, right? They feel like this is the job they can do. We need to get women to that point where you can see it, you can be it, and it becomes very normalized, right? I went earlier, talked about, we've got some amazing national legislators here that we can all look to, and they're very interested in building a bench and making sure that we're pulling women up, right? So if one of our state representatives or state senators or one of our Congress people decides not to run anymore, who is that bench? Who are those women that we're pulling forward? Who are we, Councillor Simmons and Mayor Siddiqui, who are we pulling forward from our community to make sure that there are people that we can, that can serve, women that can serve, that are already serving in their community. They're already, deeply solving problems and being that authentic person to do that collaborative work. I mean, I have really enjoyed working with both Councillor Simmons and Mayor Siddiqui on so many issues that are related to women and not, right? Because we're collaborative people, and it's how women solve problems. This is how we do it. We talk to people, we listen, we collaborate, we make sure that we're really getting to the heart of the issue. And that's the thing that I've really enjoyed the most about being on the City Council, both this term and last term, is that we have had 4 women that have been on, not just 1 out of the 9. And so, I want to say, serve in your community, figure out where it makes sense. If you do want to run, if not, absolutely support a female candidate with your dollars, with your time, however that you can do that, because it's critically important.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, so now we will transition to the Q&A portion of our program. Please continue to submit any questions to the Q&A feature in Zoom. Mayor Siddiqui, our first question from the audience comes from Sharon and Isa Lazada. The question is, can you speak to why it's important for students to vote in participatory budgeting in Cambridge and at CRLS, and how that can put power in the hands of the people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think participatory budgeting has been such a success in Cambridge, and we're fortunate where a lot of cities aren't able to have participatory budgeting. So I think for those of you who are new to participatory budgeting, I'll quickly give a brief primer about how it works. It's basically a democratic way to manage public money, and that public money gets allocated by the city manager and the city council. And the cool thing about it, the great thing about it, is that it's really the residents' input that makes up for gaps in official knowledge, which leads to better and more equitable and innovative solutions, while also bringing the people and government closer together. And so I think that's why I've been a fan, and I've been voting in the PB process. And here in Cambridge, if you're 12 and up, you get to participate. Last year, we had about, I think, almost 8,000 residents participate, which I think there's been a steady increase every year. But we were able to fund a few different projects. One that I think a lot of us really wanted to see happen was the laundry access in public schools, and that was an issue that came up from the community. Another thing was, I think there was Wi-Fi, expanding outdoor Wi-Fi. There's a few others, and maybe Councillor Simmons and Vice Mayor remember, but there's a public bathroom as well. So what's great about it is it's a way to really get ideas from the residents, and to have the residents participate. And this year we also made the ballots into different languages. Again, you have to make this accessible. So I don't know if the Vice Mayor or Councilor Simmons has anything else to add.
The only thing I would add to that is a good place to practice voting. Because you can do it at 12. We're trying to bring the voting age to 16, but now at 12, you can have your voice heard. And if you equate again your vote with your voice, 12 years old is a great place to start getting in the practice of showing up. And sometimes you don't win, and that's how democracy works. But the most important thing is you participated, you were heard, because your voice is your vote, or your vote is your voice. And so that's what I think is great about participatory budgeting. I was very enthusiastic when I saw so many young people from our high school and our middle schools there participating in the process of coming up with what the items were we going to vote on. And Cambridge being a resource-rich city, we were through citizen participation, we were able to disperse close to $1 million, I think it is now, on projects that just were not funded in the normal budget process. So it's an extraordinary opportunity to be. It's an extraordinary opportunity for civic participation.
I just wanted to add quickly that I think one of the things that the participatory budgeting does, other than the great ways that have been mentioned already, is identify gaps and challenges in the city that maybe you hadn't thought about, right? So if we think about the mayor saying that one of the biggest, I think the biggest voted on item was laundry access at the high school. And I think that starts a community conversation about the fact that, we have students that need laundry access, and that kind of opens your mind to, we live in a community and we may not really know some of these things, right? So if you think about, charging stations, public bathrooms, some of these things when you're 12, it is good to start thinking about your community and community members and what's needed and what those challenges and gaps are for community members that you never thought about. So beyond the voting and beyond it being like this really amazing citywide process, I think it's actually a good, thought experiment about what challenges are facing your city.
Yes.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Mallon. And thank you, everyone. But before we go, #HerVote will ask you to make history today. And in order to explain this, I'm going to pass it on to Ninger.
As we wrap up our forum, we again want to thank the Mellon Foundation, Harvard University, the Radcliffe Institute, the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America, and Cambridge Public Schools. Thank you to our panelists for dedicating their time to talk with us today, as well as their ongoing public service to the City of Cambridge. Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui, Vice Mayor Mallon, and Councilor Simmons. Thank you, Professor Kamensky and Abby Cohen, for your role in organizing this forum and bringing #HerVote to life. #HerVote would like our audience with a call to action. We ask you to determine what you want from your government and participate in elections so that can become a reality. This year, we should all be participating in the election. If you have the right to vote, please use it. It is too sacred and fragile to not use. If you cannot vote, there are lots of other ways to get involved. You can help connect others with voter registration, watching children while their parents vote, providing transportation, or just visiting our website at www.hervote.net. Even with the COVID-19 pandemic, connections with others within and beyond our communities are very important. Harvard University, the Radcliffe Institute, and the Schlesinger Library are committed to preserve the voices of all women. Therefore, when including #HerVote on Twitter or Instagram, your tweet or photo will be collected by the Schlesinger Library and will be preserved and ultimately made available for future researchers, teachers, and students. Please do go on Twitter and or Instagram and post the issue most important to you right now using our #HerVote. Finally, as #HerVote works to engage in conversation with communities across the country, we encourage you to have those conversations in your homes, in your religious communities, with friends, and across our social and institutional divides. Now is the time for dialogue and action. Thank you for your time, and we hope you will join us at future forums.